What's going on, everyone? Welcome into Boston Has Entered the Chat. If you like this show, be sure to tune into Foxborough Rush. We've got Stefon Diggs talking about how excited he is to work with Drake May, where he is in his recovery post-injury, and so much more. So be sure to check out Foxborough Rush with me and Keagan Stiefel wherever you get your podcasts. Also, subscribe and like over at YouTube, Twitch, or wherever else you enjoy your audio podcasts. Don't forget that Boston Has Entered the Chat is interactive, so be sure to hit us up at #NessinChat or email us over at thechat@nessin.com. But it's time for Keagan and I to get into Boston Has Entered the Chat. All right, Keagan, welcome in. Kasey Hudson alongside Keagan Stiefel, making sure I say your name correctly there. We got a lot to get into. Boston has become extremely exciting, not just because the Red Sox are in action, but they get a big signing over with the Patriots. We've got March Madness going on in numerous degrees, but first and foremost, how are you doing before we talk some Red Sox, Devers, Kristian Campbell, and so much more?
I'm doing well. It's my first time on with you. I'm excited to get it going. Usually I have George doing his NFL GM stuff. I've got Travis yelling all over the place. So it's a little more of a low-key vibe today. I'm excited for it.
Definitely calmer. It's exciting yet calm. Yeah. I like to feel like I'm a good balance between what you'll get with George and Travis.
More in control, I would say.
There we go.
Not surprising that you're more in control, but
a little bit more collected, but something that's less on the collected side. It's made news that Rafael Devers might be off to a concerning start. Now, we know that during spring training, there was question marks around whether or not he would be able to solidify and secure holding down that third baseman spot. Then we find out before opening day, he's heading to that DH full time. And then he basically said it wasn't of concern to him. He was prepared for this move. It was totally fine. Everybody supported and rallied around him. But what have you made of his first 3 games now in this new position, focusing on DH?
Couldn't be a worse start. You just saw it there. An MLB record, most strikeouts through 3 games. So if I were to say I'm not concerned, I think that would be a little bit of a lie. I think watching him, I'm not a hitting coach, but he's clearly behind on everything. And I think because we all know there are so many things that could go into that, whether it's injury, I think is something we're always concerned about, especially him and his shoulder history. Whether it's just a mental thing, the yips is a big thing in baseball with pitchers. Maybe it's just he doesn't know where he's at right now. Maybe he's still getting used to playing DH and not having the routine of going out in the field and forgetting his last at-bat and being able to kind of restart from new. It's all hitting all the time for him right now. So a lot of factors obviously going into it. I think we're going to see him turn it around. We've seen this happen. I think this is year 8 for him of it's never really a fast start for him. And then once May starts to roll around, he's the Rafael Devers we all know and love. So concerning for right now, I think everybody on the team isn't really hitting right now, except for Kristian Campbell, a guy we'll talk about later. So in that scope of things, a little bit concerning, but I think he'll turn it around.
Yeah, I want to play advocate for a second because I want to go with concerning's not the word I would use. Surprising. Okay. Because you're talking about a guy who, again, had a different focal point, a different role in this roster, but 143 hits, 28 home runs, and has that advantage as a lefty versus righties. And then when it comes to the Rangers pitching crew, one would say he preliminary went against righties, which he should have had an advantage over. So I think the surprise of him not being able to carry what we know he can do into any of these first 3 games has created a little bit of this wreckage. But moreover, that designated hitter position, you already touched on it. Like you're limited in what you're doing. Your focus comes in hot and heavy and making sure you can produce hitting wise. And then he's had that shoulder struggle during spring training and stuff. And this is such a mentally tough position to be the DH. Like you got to come in and be able to produce right out the gate. So I would more so put it on the fact of him trying to hone in his focus in a way that he hasn't had to do so before. But if he is working through this previous shoulder situation, leave it to me to use a hockey reference, but goalies hate feeling cold between the pipes, right? They like the reps, they like the action coming at them to keep the joints going, and it would be difficult, I would think, as a hitter, somebody who typically has a way of keeping those muscles warm, not having that consistency in their routine and in their rituals. Would you say that's playing heavier into all of this?
Definitely. It's not only the routine aspect of it, it's that he got started so late. He didn't pick up a bat all offseason. That was a big thing that he talked about, where he wanted the MRIs coming into the year clean. No shoulder issues, nothing to worry about. but in not picking up a bat and just taking it easy throughout the offseason, he's starting later than everybody else. Guys don't just quit cold turkey and then pick it back up when the season starts, when spring training starts. So I think he's behind where everybody else was getting into spring training, and he obviously didn't play in spring training games because he was going through his progression of building up and being ready for that. I think he only played in a few, so he's just behind. He's catching up to where everybody else is, and eventually everybody gets to the same point. It doesn't matter if you started early or not because you're so far into the season that it won't matter. I think we're going to have to wait till he gets to that point to really see how he's going to take on or take to this DH role, because it is so different. The mental aspect of him at third base, we saw it a lot. When he would make an error, you would see it show up in his offense. Or if he would make a good play, we would see it show up in his offense. He's very much, however he was playing on the defensive side of the ball would kind of carry over offensively, and he would go on these hot runs. He's not going to have that. So it takes a while to get used to this new role. If you've been watching the broadcasts on Nessie, OB and Loomer have talked about have you talked to David Ortiz? Have you talked to JD Martinez, guys that you've seen have success in this role? He said, not yet, but I will. I think he's still learning what this means for him. But a month ago, he was dead set on not being the DH. And today, he's the DH full time. He's going to be there pretty much every day. So even just that mental aspect of, all right, I gave in, I'm going to do what you guys need me to do, there's going to take some time to get used to what the role is. So a lot of aspects going into it, a lot of different things. At the end of the day, you're going to reach a certain point where it is what it is. Right. We're just so far away from that where all these different things have to be figured out before we get there.
Yeah, I think you make a great point to mention that there's mental hurdles within the mental hurdle. Like when he was and this was such a large topic of conversation. I mean, he was stoic to the point that he was not going to be pushing off of third base whatsoever. So the surprise in itself that came about, and his acceptance of reality. He could have said one thing, but I think you make a great point to say it's probably going to take a couple series before it actually fully resonates with him, and how he has to readjust what his routine is to make sure that he can continue to be powerful and purposeful in that role. And plus, opening up the series, and this was my argument for, game one opening weekend, is you're going against a Rangers team that's considered to be one of the top teams in the MLB with high expectations of, getting a deep run in the postseason and probably making some noise. So they've got depth at their rotation. They've got a really solid roster going on over there. So I can understand at first, like I said, preliminary righties he's going against, that's where he should be impactful. But overall, 61 appearances at bat, 12 hits, 3 home runs. That's career-wise versus the Texas Rangers. So maybe it's another series or two where we see Devers find his swing, per se, and get into a smooth setting of everything.
Just looking at it from the pitchers themselves, like you go from Nathan Eovaldi, who he's still throwing mid-90s to the high 90s, and then Malley, who was on the mound, and he's throwing like the high 80s. There's a big difference there when you're preparing for a guy who can really bring it and a guy who can't. And he was slow to everybody. It didn't matter if it was a guy who was throwing high 90s or high 80s. He's slow to it. And is his stance too open? Is it a shoulder issue? Is he just getting back into the timing of things the way all hitters do? You have to kind of pinpoint what the issue is before you can fix it. And I still think he's in that stage of, I don't even know what the issue is. I have to pinpoint exactly what my problem is, and then I can fix it. He's a professional hitter. He's one of the best in baseball. There's a reason he's hitting number 2 still. They're not going to move him. He's the DH. He's hitting second because he can not only hit for power and drive guys in, but he can get on base and he can be successful throughout the game, whether it's in the early innings or the late innings. So we're going to see him start to pick it up eventually. I really do just think it needs to be one of those things where, all right, my problem is X, fix that, and then we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least we have time. Things just got going here for the Red Sox, and they made it clear during spring training, regardless of kind of some of the shuffling that needed to take place, he's still a key guy and asset to this team and roster. Now, another big name for the Red Sox that's probably not off to the flashiest start considering, you got Triston Casas that's only got 1 hit up to date, and we weren't particularly expecting this either, but when he's got up to bat, we've seen the frustration, we've seen some irritation and emotion on his face as he's kind of worked through the first 3 games versus the Rangers. What have you kind of seen out of this particular start for Casas?
This is the same thing we saw last year when he came off injury, where it is I don't know what the problem is with Devers. It's very clearly a timing issue, and it's a not taking the bat off his shoulder. Casas is a guy who we've seen throughout his career. We've only really seen him in spurts. We haven't seen him get a full season of work. And when he's working into things, he just watches pitches. And if teams know that, they're just going to throw him right down the middle. And there have been a couple bad calls. It hasn't been the greatest series for umpires in Texas. So I think it's a mental game for him of, do I take the bat off the shoulder and swing at bad pitches because they're going to be calling them strikes, or do I stick to what I believe in, the fact that they aren't strikes? He's had 3 strikeouts in Texas that were on balls. So you can't do anything with that if you're Triston Casas. I don't think he's going to overextend himself and start swinging at bad pitches either, because he's so rigid in the strike zone thing that it really is just going to have to, until the umpires get better and until he's starting to work his walks, the hits won't start to come, because he's if there's one thing about Triston Casas, he believes in what he believes in, and he's very strong in his opinions. So I think that's probably the issue more than anything, is that he's just dead set on, I'm right, the umpires are wrong, and if I have to strike out 20 times to prove it, I will.
I love that you mentioned basically comparison to last season. In other words, don't panic. We've seen this before. We can almost put a perfect timeline to where things can pick up. Now, kind of looking at some of his numbers from March of last year, it completely lines up with what you mentioned. Taking a minute to ease into things, 15 appearances at bat, 1 run, 1 hit. That's not particularly the sexiest March that one would have, but then these numbers completely take off come April through 63 appearances at bat. So this is just more of a, this is who he is kind of thing versus any level of concern you'd lock in on.
Yeah, he looks fine playing defense. He still has a great eye. He should probably have a 400 OPS right now, but they keep striking him out. It's on balls outside the zone. That's baseball sometimes. Until they implement ABS and he's able to tap the helmet and prove guys wrong in the moment, we're going to have to wait till the umpire calls come out and or the umpire cards come out, and we see, oh, right, Triston Casas was right again. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter during the game because he can't tell them that.
I like that you mentioned that Casas is right again. And look, everyone hold their horses because there might be a little bit of a cascade come back June, but August through September, you can count on him to rack up just as he anticipates to do so. Yeah. But on the more positive side, a different take of emotions. Game 1, we heard from Kristian Campbell saying how emotional he was, how it took him like the first half of the game to settle in. Second half, he really started to lock in. We saw him get this powerful hit. Well, he also picked up his first home run as a Red Sox over the weekend on Saturday. So far, his statistics through 10 appearances at bat, 1 run, 5 hits, 1 RBI, 2 strikeouts, and that home run that I just mentioned. Did you expect this from Campbell out the gate? Because he was another one talked about as one of the most promising prospects. I'd say 6 weeks ago wasn't guaranteed to make the opening day roster. Cora's talked about some of the struggles he had during spring training, and now all of a sudden he's in the top topic of conversation to potentially be AL Rookie of the Year. What do you think of Campbell?
Yeah, if there's one thing he's going to do, it's hit. He's done it. It's only been a year and a half, really. I guess it's 2.5 at this point. But since he started to explode onto the scene of a guy who was very real about potentially making the big leagues, it's been about a year and a half, and he's done nothing but hit the entire time. So to say I expected it, I don't think it's a shocker. I think everybody probably should have expected him to hit. But, if you see me look over here, it's because the Red Sox are on the TV right there. He just hit another double as we're recording the show.
Add to the stats.
Yeah, he's still hitting, and I expect him to continue to do that. We saw him make a decent play in left field. He didn't come down with it, but to be able to cover as much ground, I think it was a 15% catch probability. He didn't catch it, so we shouldn't be applauding people for things they didn't do, but he's played clean defense at second base. He played pretty well in left field on, I believe it was Saturday, and he's still hitting. So as early as it is, I don't think you could say he isn't the front runner for AL MVP or maybe MVP, but Rookie of the Year because he's going to hit. There's no doubt in my mind that he'll continue to hit the way he has. 5 for 10 in the first 3 games of the season. He's not going to carry a 500 batting average throughout the year, but the kid knows how to rake. So if he can keep up defensively and not make mistakes and force himself out of the lineup, you should expect to see him almost every day.
What's so wild is that after he gets interviewed about this first home run anyway, he says that he thinks this is the first one that he's had since college. So talk about a journey.
First one his parents saw.
That's what?
That's what Yeah, first one that his parents saw
Oh, his
since
parents
college.
all. Sorry, excuse me.
Right.
Thank you for the clarification. So at least he had his
No
family
problem.
in the crowd, but still, like there's been moments where you could tell that he's hyper focused on certain aspects of his game, and then for
Yes.
this to come through for him while he's just worn a Red Sox jersey for the third time ever, then that tells you a lot about what the foundation is and where a starting point is and where it can go from here. But mentioning the AL Rookie of the Year and the potential, he's sitting third in the rankings when you look at the odds for him to potentially secure that. He's behind Dominguez for the New York Yankees and Smith for the Houston Astros, and then in comes Kristian Campbell for the Red Sox at plus 650. Do you think this is something where he can make the climb over these two guys over the course of the next couple of series?
Absolutely. I've been known to say some harsh things about Jason Dominguez in the past. I think he stinks. I don't think he's a good baseball player, so I wouldn't bet on him. I don't know why he's the front runner. It's probably because he has the nickname the Alien, and he looked like a freak at 16, and it's like, oh, this guy's great. He hasn't been good, so there's no reason to bet on him there. I'm not going to act like I know much about Houston's rookies and stuff like that, but Kristian Campbell started the year with the big league club. He will finish the year. Unless an injury comes along, I think he's going to play upwards of 150 games, so he'll be in the lineup almost every day. And like I said, he hits, and that's what matters when you're betting on Rookie of the Year. Can the guy hit? Does he put up those gaudy numbers? He's going to be 6th or 7th in the order, so he's going to have opportunities to drive in runs. I really like those odds. And then Roman Anthony, looking at the way the outfield's set up, Willie Abreu's not going anywhere because he's the only other guy who's been hitting for the Red Sox. Jaron Duran and Ceddanne Rafaela have their roles. They're both great defensive players. Duran, obviously, last year was one of the best players in the American League. So Roman Anthony might not come up as soon as we all anticipated. He might be a guy who gets a July, August, September call-up, so he won't even be in the running for Rookie of the Year. So in terms of Red Sox guys, if you're looking for a Red Sox to bet on for one of these awards, I think it's Kristian Campbell because he's got the best odds, not only at the book, but in my eyes, just to end up getting it done because he's going to have the opportunity.
Yeah, and again, just to get off to a start like this says a lot of things because there's expectations for the Red Sox as a whole, but to slot in the way that he so perfectly has, and you can already see the pressure that he puts on himself, not in a crippling manner, but just to make sure that he shows up for what's expected of him with this team. It makes it very promising. So we'll see what continues to go by. You can also keep us updated as you're continuing to watch on the side, but coming up,
I will. Don't worry.
Keagan and I are going to hit what's trending, but first, did you know that you can stream the entire Red Sox season with a NESN 360 annual plan, available at all new reduced price of just $20 a month annually, and for a limited time get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. All right, what's trending? Well, at least we have less cringy topics because the last Boston has entered the chat. We had to circle back to Bill Belichick and Jordan, and I wanna be on brand for Bill, but it's still too cringy for me. But sticking with the baseball chat for just a moment here, Yankees new bats. If anyone ever told you that you weren't going to use math when you grow up, lies, because you're going to use math, you're going to use chemistry, especially if you want to be a baller, particularly crafting the perfect bat called the torpedo barrel. It brings more wood and mass to where you most often make contact as a hitter. The idea is to increase the number of barrels and decrease misses. And we're seeing the Yankees have spectacular bats. It's so hard for me to even give the Yankees any credit. Everyone knows I struggle with New York teams. But Keagan, what did you make of the meticulous creation of this powerful bat and what it's doing for the Yankees?
I think it's so funny watching Yankees fans defend their team on Twitter. It's one of my favorite things to do because they really have nothing to defend. If they were even able to get these bats onto the field, they're obviously legal. Every bat's looked at before games and before they're even brought into the clubhouse. So the fact of that being an issue, it's not. They're legal bats. It was a great idea by somebody, but they're defending it like they know what the science behind it is when they don't. They're just people from New York who want their baseball team to be good and don't want their baseball team to get in trouble for doing anything wrong. The argument they should be making is that the guy who invented these bats no longer works for the Yankees. He works for the Marlins. So you could just say the Marlins can do the same thing. They just don't have guys who can actually hit home runs and who can get these barrels onto the ball. So laughing at Yankees fans is one thing. Watching them mash against the Brewers has been tough because, like you, I do not want to see the Yankees do well ever, but they've been crushing the ball.
Yeah, we can't go against what they've been able to produce, but sometimes it's just so hard to let that compliment roll off the tongue. It's funny that you mentioned how they just go straight to like defending certain aspects of the bat situation. But again, might sound a little biased here. I just feel like there's always a defensive argument immediately when something gets released for New York fans. Like, you don't have to defend everything. Just let the batting speak for itself. And we have plenty of guys on that roster that's making that case for them ever so delicately. So I thought that was an interesting one, but also the fact of like the perfect combination for the bat to come to life, and then you've got a guy like Judd who's just completely crushing it out here. Like, do you play into a role with the bat for him specifically, or is it just him being him?
He said today, he said, I'm not using the bat. It's for 3 years I've been he didn't say this, but for 3 years he's been the best hitter in the American League. Why would he change anything? Respect that. And also, super producer Ante, just on top of it, sent me a tweet. Twins catcher Ryan Jeffers is using the torpedo bat today. So it's not just a Yankees thing. This thing's going to spread. I would say by next Sunday, when somebody's recording the next Boston Has Entered the Chat, every team in baseball is going to have at least one guy using this thing.
I know. It would be madness if Judd started to use it, because then that would just give New York fans a whole different case of ammo to run along with. The way that you roll your eyes at that one, at least we can say we're on the same page. So Yankee new bat. We'll see who else ends up picking up on this particular bat and powerhouse coming down the stretch here. As for our next topic, pivoting over to the NBA, the Celtics have won 55-plus games in 3 straight seasons, their longest such streak since the 1980s. Now, of course, these are one of the top teams favored to have another great postseason, but what do you make of them being able to replicate some seasons, one should say, since the 1980s? There was an NBA championship or a few picked up during that time frame also. So what are we really saying here?
Yeah, we've hit the point with the Celtics where nothing matters unless they win a championship. You know, couldn't care less if they won 55 games. If they sweep the first or the second rounds, I could not care. It's championship or bust for this team, which is a great problem to have, where nothing you do matters unless it's winning a championship, because everybody knows how good you are. My issue more now is, now that the team's been sold, how long is it going to last? How long are they going to be paying that tax and keeping this team around? It's a real question. I think Ante and Trav will talk about that a lot on Hold My Banner over the course of the summer, because changes could be coming down the pipe. But for now, for the team that's currently in place, you can do anything. Jason Tatum can score 70 points in a game. It doesn't matter. Go win another championship.
Oh my gosh, you're not the first person that I've heard that from. So that just leads me to ask, now that you mentioned the new ownership potentially pivoting over, they have the ability and potentially the money to secure and make sure that they continue to have 55-plus winning seasons after this. Is that encouraging for you because of the new ownership, or are there too many question marks because we know that once things change up, there's an adjustment period typically? Yeah,
I mean, so the tax the tax man needs to be paid. Always. So it's whether or not the new ownership group is going to be willing to pay that tax. I think Brad Stevens is a perfect guy to essentially run the team, because whether or not the ownership group believes they're willing to pay the tax, I think he will put the team in a best position possible to win. But, you know, to get that number down, the Derek Whites of the world, the Jaylen Browns of the world, you're going to have to make hard decisions on these guys. Al Horford's coming up this year. I don't know what the money looks like in the NBA with contracts, but can you sign him to a vet minimum? I don't think you're allowed to with the career he's had. So you have to make tough decisions on core players moving forward, or you have to just shell out $100 million for just to keep your roster around. So without knowing all of the details of it, I would say I'm confident in the fact that we'll get at least one more season after this one of a great roster of the Jays together, of Porzingis and Holiday and White. Moving forward beyond that, it could start to get murky. We might see Baylor Shireman playing bigger minutes by the week just to make sure he's ready to take on a bigger role. Sam Hauser, by the way, it's a name I haven't mentioned. He's gone. I think he's the first one to go, because he's making $10 million, but he counts like $35 million against their tax hit. So it's just not worth it. If you've got Baylor Shireman there waiting in the wings, elevate him into that role and ship Sam Hauser out the door.
Thank you for bringing in the tax perspective. Nobody realizes how painful that is. No, but it's painful. Taxes really hurt much more than one thing, especially if you move to a different state where it's definitely steeper. But moving forward to a little bit of hockey. As y'all know, I love Brad Marchand collecting rats after setting up the game-winning goal in overtime. And of all things, that where the connection was made is where this one gets even more wild. Now, initially, because of the pain and the salt all attached to this situation, it was hard to say, like, what down south, the Rat King now joining the Rat Squad. But what did you make of, outside of the weirdness of still seeing him in the wrong colors, Rat King picking up rats?
It's perfect. It's just the perfect Brad Marchand situation. He's, I was 7 years old when Brad Marchand became a Bruin, and I grew up in Massachusetts. I moved to Texas, and then I came back. But my entire, teenage and adult life, Brad Marchand has been a Bruin. So seeing him in another sweater is odd and uncomfortable. But if it were to be any team, and if he were to have any set of teammates, it's this team. It's the Florida Panthers. It's Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk. I'm really looking forward to seeing them in the postseason. No one's going to want to play that team, nor should they, because it's a bunch of pot stirrers and guys that you really want nothing to do with. So I'm sad to see him go because I grew up with him here, but seeing him with that team, it helps ease the sting a little bit.
Yeah, you can ask for better storylines that would lessen the blow just a little bit, because any sort of particular rivalries just make this that much more intense. But again, just considering who Marchand has been to the league, where the perfect antagonizing quotes and wordings have come from, then him being in a Panthers jersey and then the Rats coming onto the ice, like, it just becomes extremely fitting in the comical sense of, like, this is now our new reality and we have to deal with it, and now he gets to live out this story, and then to be out here setting up and playing on the line. We didn't expect him to be suited up so quickly. I think that's one of the extra levels of shock to all this. It was supposed to be closer to playoffs that we were potentially seeing Marchand in his new sweater, but this just made it all the more. And then if Tkachuk does truly get into the mix in a timely manner, then we're going to be talking about a lot more than picking up rats after an OT win, one would say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna see scraps instead of rats. It's gonna be guys just gunning at Tkachuk and Marchand and Bennett, because coming from a Bruins perspective, we've seen it the last couple of postseasons where no one is hated more in Boston and in New England than Sam Bennett after what he did to Marchand last year. And now they're line mates. So it's like, what's going on, man? How are we supposed to feel? Do we root for him? Do we hate him? It's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, it's that awkward situation that we all found ourselves in during Four Nations, rooting for the Tkachuk brothers. But let me ask you this. Is it more weird to see Marchand in a Panther sweater, or is it going to be more weird to see him stand up for a Sam Bennett or a Matthew Tkachuk on the ice?
That's going to be odd. It's because he's the first guy to do it. You know what I mean?
That's why I asked.
Saw it when him and Bennett were playing for Canada. We saw it. They kind of stuck up for each other a little bit. So it's probably going to be more weird on that end for sure.
Yeah, if I see him stand up for Matthew Tkachuk, it's going to be a little queasy for just a second there. But those are our trending topics. Coming up in a few, though, there are other pre-draft moves needed by the Patriots. Well, Keagan and I will get into it. Want the latest on the Patriots and the NFL? Drake May needs help, and we discuss how he can get it. Quick on Nesson's football podcast, Foxborough Rush, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and wherever else you get and enjoy your podcast. All right, we are going to dive into these topics much, much more, but it's time to get in gear with football. Are there other moves for the Patriots to make? Now, of course, the large conversation is what's going to go down in the draft, and that's probably going to particularly tell us where this team takes aim at potential other free agents that could fit what's going on. My argument to anything with formulating this team is trusting Mike Vrabel, his vision for this team, and the fact that he's not one of those go out and just grab names kind of guy. He's very meticulous in who he grabs. He's a plug and play kind of coach. So you never know sometimes, like, if the name makes sense until you see his system pan out. So I guess I overall ask you the arching question of if there's other moves you really feel heavily that this team needs to make before the draft.
I mean, just looking at the roster, the only spot left that has a huge question mark on it is left tackle. At this point in the offseason, you're not going to find one. You're not going to find a day one starting left tackle out in free agency or by trade. So you kind of have to wait until the draft. Can you make supplemental moves? Yes. But with how their cap situation set up, they technically have, I think it's around $65 million, but taking into account, the signings they'll have to make after the draft and filling out the roster and the top 53 rule, they really only have like $35 million which is something that you'll want to carry into the season, because if you're, midway through the year and you're in contention to make a postseason push, you might want to make a big trade. You might want to swing for the fences for a guy like Brandon Aiyuk. He might be available at the deadline, and you'll need $12 to $14 million available to be able to swing that trade. So I think they're pretty set with the roster right now in terms of free agency. Now it's really just focusing on where do they draft that left tackle, how do they fill in the rest of the roster spots around them. I think defensively, Mike Vrabel said it, where they found premier playmakers at each level of the defense. They feel confident in that unit. Now it's supplementing the offense, giving Drake May as much as possible to be successful. And I think we're looking at a team that's going to be a hell of a lot better than they were last year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, all signs point to this offensive line, but then of course there's just this whole weird dance and potential reality of what and who they can get at that number 4 spot come the draft time. Yeah. So say devil's advocate really fast. Travis Hunter is available at 4, but honestly, your biggest need right now more likely is going to be adding to that offensive line. Do you think that they go for the generational talent, or you think they plug the gap on the O-line?
Yeah, have you ever seen the movie Draft Day?
Of course. Kevin Costner. Okay. Say less.
Right. The Post-it note that says Vontae Mack no matter what. I have one that says Travis Hunter no matter what. You take Travis Hunter if he's available.
Figure out
he's the best player in the draft. And you're right. And you figure out the rest later. They're in a cool spot where if they draft Travis Hunter, and with the way the rest of the roster looks like, they could really make a push.
Yeah.
And by really make a push, I mean trade back into the first round. Go get that offensive tackle. I'm a big fan of Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. I've talked about him on Foxborough Rush. I've written about him. I think if he's available in the early 20s and you've already drafted Travis Hunter, you go make that trade, you get Josh Simmons, and you're a playoff team. I truly believe that. With what Travis Hunter brings on both sides, he'll be an offensive player on this team because he'll really only need to play a certain amount of snaps on defense, kind of as a slot corner with how they've set up the defense. So that's the perfect scenario for me, is Travis Hunter, trade back in, get Josh Simmons, and you move, right? You're a playoff team. You're able to fight for the division. Buffalo still has it on lock, but you're able to be competitive with them. So that's the perfect situation. But if Travis Hunter's not there, you're still in a good spot where you could draft Will Campbell or Armon Menbu and still have your left tackle. You might the supplementary picks, filling in the rest of your roster is a little bit more difficult there, but you really can't go wrong with what they've done this offseason. I've said it a few times. I'm a big fan of the way they approach the offseason and the execution as well.
Yeah, like I said, in Vrabel, I very much trust because of the way that he handles his rosters. You saw the difference that he made and the impact with the Titans, and considering the team, the roster, the shambles that he had to clean up at that point, I would say was a little bit more dramatic than what he stepped into here. So I'm a big fan of that. But the sticky note, thank you for painting that picture, because I was a big fan of that moment and all the drama that just went around the one sticky note. Travis Hunter at all costs. But there's also good picks that could fall into the second round, considering, that tends to get overlooked and you get some surprises. It depends on their athleticism and how they can plug in if they have the right guys coaching them up to make a difference. But you mentioned Brandon Aiyuk a minute ago. We do have to touch on this. Now, he's another guy that might have some attitude / character question marks around things. I'm going to chalk a lot of that up to kind of feeling undervalued and underappreciated with the role that he did play with the 49ers. But can he stay healthy? That's also a massive question mark when it comes to this guy. So there could be a potential landing spot of him being a good fit with the Patriots. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. For now, I forget who tweeted out. It was either a Schefter or a Rappaport, but it was essentially they have until Tuesday to make a trade because he's guaranteed half of his salary by Tuesday. So if he's not traded by then, the 49ers are already in they have to pay him, so they'll take him into the year. He's a good player. He's coming off an injury, but he's a good wide receiver. He gives Brock Purdy another target to throw to. So there is a deadline before the season starts to trade for Brandon Aiyuk. Right now, from New England's perspective, do you want 2 veteran wide receivers coming off of torn ACLs to lead your wide receiver room? No. Right? You know what I mean? And in that situation, if you do trade for Brandon Aiyuk, now you're giving up on Jalen Polk, and you're giving up on Javon Baker, and Kayshon Boutte's role is essentially non-existent. Pop Douglas is still there. Kendrick Bourne, you'll want a veteran wide receiver who can fill in for if one of those guys goes down or can play multiple roles. So you're really putting a lot of your eggs into the veteran injured wide receiver basket, and I never think that's good business. I've been saying it with George and Travis. If you want a good wide receiver, just draft one. And I know it's easier said than done. They haven't done it since they drafted Julian Edelman, who wasn't even a wide receiver when they drafted him. But just draft the wide receiver and pay him early. That's what good teams do. That's what smart teams do. I don't love the idea of paying older guys or trading for older guys. You already paid one. Don't go and trade for another one.
Yeah, as much as everyone thinks that the name would kind of hold some sort of value in totality to being able to be a part of this Patriots roster, I agree with the fact that you don't need two guys coming off of injury. But another thing is, and not going to add any flame to the fire, some people think that Stefon Diggs choosing to be in the Patriots locker room and kind of having some of the passion and let's just say moments we've seen on the sidelines. Yeah. I don't know if I could see him and Aiyuk both trying to lead a locker room. I feel like their leadership styles would kind of clash a bit. And right now, Diggs has an opportunity to feel like that special like head wide receiver, whether it's wide receiver 1 or 2, depending on what takes place in the draft. He still has that veteran presence where he could be the leader in that locker room and that leader for a lot of the young guys on this team. But you bring Aiyuk into the mix, and I think that's just going to change things dynamically a little too much. And another thing Vrabel built off of heavily was like relationship and connection is going to be crucial for this locker room. Right. And that's where I just don't really see things jazzing. And then comparing to injured veterans or now on a health journey, one would say Aiyuk's had a lot more injuries on his resume than Stefon Diggs has had. So that's my other biggest concern. Like Diggs said it in his press conference. It's not like I'm a 31-year-old who's been injured over and over again. He's basically had a clean slate for 10 years. And then all of a sudden this, whereas like Aiyuk, we're hearing about him being out of the lineup so much more consistently.
Yeah, and for Aiyuk, in terms of production where you truly are number one wide receiver, we're talking about a year and a half, if that. Stefon Diggs did it for 8 years. He was a number one wide receiver, one of the best in the NFL for almost a decade. Brandon Aiyuk, it took him a while to settle in, and then once he did, he got an injury. He had another great year, then he got injured again. Excuse me, I'm throwing stuff. But
that's how frustrated you are.
Yeah, come on, Brandon Aiyuk. But he hasn't shown the ability to consistently show up for his team like Stefon Diggs has. And, you know, I did a story last year about Jalen Polk, and I talked to one of his college wide receiver coaches, and what his coach told me was Jalen Polk's great because he fits in any locker room. As a coach, you can only have one guy throwing fits. You can't have multiple. You can't have, because they feed off of each other. And then one guy throws a fit, the other guy thinks it's okay, and then it's mayhem. Where a guy like Jalen Polk, and not just him specifically, but a lot of these wide receivers who come in and they can settle into that number 3, number 4 role, their value is in, I can be the calm amongst the storm. If you have Stefon Diggs throwing a fit because he's not getting the ball enough, a guy can slide right up into that role and find success without needing the targets that a Diggs does or an Aiyuk does. So having multiple of those guys in a room with a bunch of young wide receivers and a coach who's never coached wide receivers before, and Todd Downing, is a recipe for disaster. I don't think you want that. I think what you want is Stefon Diggs, who has the talent and the veteran leadership when he isn't throwing fits on the sidelines that we've seen, you know, in Buffalo, we've seen in Minnesota, we've seen in Houston. People rave about him. Mm-hmm. His teammates and his coaches love him. Whether we see it on TV or not, you know, him having his moments, the people around him love him. So there's something to be said for that. Having that guy plus the guys already in the system and younger players who can maybe learn from him on the field, I think is a decent recipe. Adding more fuel to the fire, it's never a good idea. You're overreaching for something that doesn't make sense at this point.
Yeah, and that would go against everything I just complimented this whole staff on. But that's right. Such a great point, though, too, to say what Aiyuk has done in his timeline of being a top wide receiver in comparison to what Stefon Diggs has done as a top wide receiver. They're kind of two completely different sheets if you look at it. So I think that that's a great point out to even emphasize, like, there's really no point in bringing him in. Like, once upon a time, maybe he was in like that yak category and like you love the hype of that kind of stuff, but we can't guarantee it would translate. And then again, coming off of injury. But kind of sticking with Stefon Diggs for a minute before we talk about some other Patriots players or former players, with the addition of Stefon Diggs to the locker room, And you kind of already touched on the fact that like players do love playing with him. They love his passion. They love his compete. We got a chance to catch up with a few reporters from Texas just to kind of get more clarification on how this compete is and how it does translate across the locker room. And honestly, all positive. I mean, more positive than anything else. But what is this addition to the wide receiving room, regardless of any other pieces being plugged in, kind of rate this wide receiving group amongst the entire NFL? Because you talked about draft-wise how this can quickly elevate to a playoff situation, but does Stefon Diggs say he picks up right where he left off? Where does he now put the ranking on this wide receiving group?
Perfect world, he probably makes them a middle of the pack group. I think Pop Douglas is a great slot wide receiver, but Stefon Diggs' value comes in the fact that he kind of eats out of the slot. He can, if you need a first down, you throw him in the slot, he'll go get you. He'll get open and he'll be there for you. If he's pigeonholed into an outside role where he has to be that true X number one outside the numbers receiver, I think your group is worse off for it. That's why Buffalo drafted Khalil Shakir, when Buffalo drafted Khalil Shakir, he's a slot receiver. He had to play in the slot, and it forced Stefon Diggs into a role where he wasn't getting as many targets, he wasn't playing as much, and that kind of ruined the relationship. That's why he ended up getting traded before last offseason, because he knew that the team was moving on without him. Right. Now the Patriots, they signed him and they're bringing him in to play that role, but you're relying on other guys to play multiple roles like Diggs does. You know what I mean? So Jalen Polk likes to play out of the slot as well. He didn't get to do that last year because of Douglas. Douglas can only play in the slot. Kendrick Bourne can play that Z role, but he might have to move because Stefon Diggs is moving around. Without explaining how everybody plays and where they play and who it's best for, you need multiple wide receivers. You need receivers who can play all three positions. They have one of those now. I still think in the draft, you should try to draft another guy who can do that and fill your team up with as many of those as possible, because that's how you're going to be at your best. For now, Diggs is going to do what Diggs needs to do to be good. Everybody else is going to have to fall in line. Whether they can or not remains to be seen in my eyes.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because considering that he is one of the only versatile wide receivers now a part of the group, that kind of raises questions. If he gets a chance to lock it down where he's most confident and comfortable, then that could elevate this room. But if he ends up being forced out again, then that can change some question marks around everything. And the wide receiver conversation is now kind of tilting when it comes towards the draft, but there are some worthy options, some bigger guys that would immediately come straight to that wide out position versus having any more competition in the slot. For me, it wouldn't make sense to not have him be in a dominant slot role, considering who Josh McDaniels is, B, the development of slot receivers I know the system's going to be a little different with Vrabel, but New England as a whole, what slot receivers have meant and how they've developed here regardless. And if there's a guy most capable of kind of having these methodical routes, because that's what Stefon Diggs is known for, just having these ridiculous route running capabilities, why would you even chance it? He's the veteran. He's got the resume that's proven that he can do it more. Do you think that there would be much of a level to competition when it comes to who's going to hold down that slot receiver spot?
I think Pop Douglas is great at a Josh McDaniels offense because he can also be a gadget guy, right? If Stefon Diggs needs to play in the slot throughout the majority of the game, they're still going to find ways to get Pop Douglas involved, and that's a guy you want involved because he can break the game open. He can be a guy who you get him a design touch and he can go get you 25, 30 yards. So I like that aspect of it. I love that you mentioned Josh McDaniels, because we forget that Josh McDaniels loves tight ends, so he's going to use tight ends, and it's going to mean less wide receivers on the field at a time. If you can have Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, or maybe even a rookie in that second tight end role, Pop Douglas, Stefon Diggs, now you're looking at a pretty decent offense, right? And especially one that's run by Josh McDaniels, because he's going to design things to make things as easy as possible on all of the receivers and put a lot on Drake May's plate. That's different from what we saw last year. But if you draft a guy third overall and we think he is what he is, he should be able to handle the responsibilities of, full pressure in the offense, having to make decisions, call protections, read defenses. If you really think he's that guy, you put the pressure on his shoulders. I think they will do that. So for these wide receivers that we're not super in love with, the Jalen Polks, the Javon Bakers, the Kayshon Bouttys, this is a great system for them to play in, because at the end of the day, it's go run the route the way we tell you to run it. Maybe you'll get the ball. We'll see if you get the ball if you're open or not.
I love it. How about just do your job? That's the simplification of it. Everybody just do your job.
They said it for 20 years for a reason, and it worked. So maybe just bring that back.
Exactly. I'm sure it's coming back hot, fast, and in a hurry. So from football over to some hoops. Coming up, it's time to preview some UConn versus USC women's basketball. And speaking of elite women at the top of their game, from Simone Biles to Caitlin Clark to all of their top stories in sports, we got you covered on Nesson's Women in Sports podcast, Respect Her Game. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and wherever else you get and enjoy your podcast. All right, I mentioned it, from the football field to the courts. It's time for some hoop talk. And I know when it comes to USC women's basketball, they had that unfortunate news about Juju. I hate that this happened for her, because Juju Watkins was just on such a tear, and she was such a staple in this USC team, not only just like for what they did defensively, them being one of the top defensive teams in women's basketball, but I mean, the number of 30-point performances that she was just making look like cake was dumb. But kind of sticking with her for a minute as we get ready to preview this game, how much do you think her being in the lineup is just going to kind of, I don't know, ruin their chances at having the success that was anticipated for this USC team? Because I know I had them pretty high. This is why I have to print multiple papers for brackets, because it's my sanity that's hanging by a string when stuff like this happens.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, the way they run their offense is Juju and get out of the way. And they have really capable bigs that can get offensive rebounds and get second chance points. So they still have that, right? Raya Marshall is one of my favorite players in college basketball. She's really you're going to have to put a lot of pressure on the bigs plates. You're going to have to muck things up against UConn. But UConn has shooters, and UConn can spread you out, and UConn can score. So if Paige Beckers has an off shooting night, I think there's a chance USC stays in the game. If she doesn't, which she hasn't in a very long time. 40 points in the Sweet 16. She's at the top of her game right now. You know, if she continues that stretch, I don't think there's much of a chance, because with the way the game is currently played, you can't defensively muck things up if a team's just going to spread it out and shoot. So I don't love USC's chances, but offensively, if they can get in the paint, if they can feed Raya Marshall and 44, I forget her name.
Kiki Eferen.
Thank you.
I believe
if they can feed them, if they can get easy baskets, if they can get offensive rebounds, they'll have a chance.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So I like that you point out Paige Beckers, if she can have a little bit lesser of an offensively destructive performance.
Don't score 40, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Calm it down just a smidge. But because of what UConn as well as Paige Beckers can do offensively, and just kind of how relentless they can be on the attack, Mike's biggest concern with Juju not being in the mix is not the fact that they're just going to completely flop defensively, because I think that she has such a balanced attack as well as defensive play to her game. But my fear is that they're going to get so stuck in just playing defense, because like you said, it's kind of Juju and everybody else. So like, you're one of the top defensive teams, but if you get stuck playing defense and you can't add to any points, we're looking at a margin here. I mean, I'm pretty sure USC are underdogs by like 14.5 points. I wasn't expecting that kind of margin when it came to USC in any sort of conversation, even when Juju initially, her injury became relevant to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, they're averaging 80 points a game, so they can score. She's just at 25, and it's run through Juju. I don't know the depth of USC's guard play. I'm not going to act like I do, but if they can have somebody who can really just set others up, and she doesn't need to provide a scoring spark like Juju does, but if she can be that playmaker that Juju is, if they can find somebody like that, I think they'll have a chance, because they do score, right? Like I said, I really struggle seeing them be able to not only do that, but defensively keep up when UConn's going to be able to spread them out. I think matchup-wise, it was always going to favor the Huskies, just in terms of the style of play. You know, shooting is going to be such a big aspect of this game, and I think UConn's a better shooting team. Whether or not they're a better scoring team is a different question, but they're a better shooting team. So it always favored that way. And then when you take out just the best player in the nation in a lot of people's eyes, it's so deflating, and that plays such a big role in the way they're going to even enter this game. I think you might see a hot start from USC, where they're able to kind of dictate the first few minutes of the game. But once it swings into UConn's favor, I don't know if they're going to be able to have it swing back.
Yeah, that's true. It's going to be a hard thing to play, kind of catch up with. But as you mentioned, when it comes to the guard conversation, Kennedy Smith, Avery Howell, these are two other players that are going to have to step up in the category of helping out. And look, you still got some of the top blockers and stealers on the USC roster. Are there any best bets that stick out to you for this matchup between UConn and USC?
Not this one. Not to brag. Duke, I saw it coming from a mile away. I knew they were going to be able to stay competitive with South Carolina. They ended up blowing it late. They lost by 4, but they covered, so that's a win under my belt. I'm going to tout it as much as I can because I never win in women's hoops. But I like the idea of an over here. I think if UConn's shooting the lights out and they force USC into a game where they have to start shooting, things can go crazy in women's basketball, specifically when it comes to the three-point shot. I feel like if one team's shooting it really well and the other team starts chasing, you only need to hit a couple just to keep that momentum going and for it to turn into a shooting contest, specifically in the tournament too. So I like the over. I'm not sure you can tell me the number. I'm just going to say take the over. I like the shooting aspect of the game.
139.5 is the total that comes in, and the spread actually readjusted to 13.5. So you're still going to just go with the over on that one.
Just give me the over. I root for points. I root for points.
I can add to that. I like the points. I'll go with the over with you on that one. Spread feels a little steep on my personal opinion, but look, you got, again, some key defensive players still on USC's roster. Take a look at the rebound columns. When it comes to Kiki Ifren, if I'm saying her last name correctly, I apologize, Kiki girl. And then Kennedy Smith, kind of helping out in that point department. She should be sitting roughly at about a 17 average, picked up 19 the other night. So a couple names to still keep in the key rotation. And then again, with rebounds, you mentioned Ryan Marshall, have her on your list as well, because I'm sure that'll come in slightly below 9, and 9 is kind of where she's sitting on that average. It's crazy. We've run through everything: baseball, football, basketball, so many different things. Keagan, it was awesome being able to do our first show together, talking Red Sox and so much more. Once again, guys, any conversation that you guys enjoy from all Boston sports to all the professional leagues, make sure you check out all of the podcasts over at NESN. Also download NESN 360 to stay abreast of all of the exciting news. That's a wrap for myself, Kasey, as well as Keagan. We'll catch you next time on Boston Has Entered the Chat.